Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma. That's the voice you're hearing, the host extraordinaire. Nah, who am I kidding? I'm not really that extraordinary, but I am still feeling the goosebumps from just all of these championship series that have been going on around me. And for those of you who tuned in to the last episode, you got to hear me talk a little bit about the Cleveland Cavaliers, and admittedly, I'm recording a few of these episodes a little in advance, planning to take a little vacation here at the end of the week. So if this one happens to get cut and it comes out a few days later, I'm not just I'll probably still be kind of feeling it, but I'm really at the cusp of something here, just following the Father's Day weekend and the Cleveland Cavaliers win. And you know what? I'm going to stop right there for 1 second. I don't really have any shout outs today. I do have some inspiration, which I will share. But today's show, really, no agenda. I think I have 3 bullet points written down, and I have a website article up on my screen. So if you're looking for some hearty, meaty Steelers football talk, you're not going to find it here today. You're going to hear a little bit of something from a fan perspective. And just if you are a displaced NFL fan, you're living as a Steelers fan, let's say in California, for example, then you may have interest in this particular show because I'm just going to be talking about, I have a family that is half Cleveland Browns fans, half Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and, it's really fun with rivalries. Of course, it hasn't been fun for them since 1995 or something like that, the last year the Browns were any decent. Well, I think they made the playoffs once with Derek Anderson in 07 or something like that. So, just mediocrity, that mistake on the lake, and the Cleveland Cavaliers breaking this 50-some year streak and finally bringing a championship to Cleveland. Because if you've seen the documentaries on ESPN, Believeland and all that, I live that, folks. I live that every single day, and I know I am a very passionate, diehard Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I kind of wanted to bring you this episode just because me talking about a Cleveland team, there may have been some heads that exploded if they were on the other end of the headphones from me, and I just want to set some of the record straight. And I got a couple cool comments, and I also saw a really neat article from my buddy Jeff Hartman over at Behind the Steel Curtain, and I wanted to have Jeff on and kind of go back and forth with this, and hopefully I can do that in the future with Jeff. He had put out a article on Father's Day, and it talked about how a father can change their child's life with the selection of an NFL team, how something as small as their favorite NFL team can alter a child's life. And Jeff goes on to pretty much discuss growing up in Wheeling, West Virginia, and that's the north panhandle of the state for those of you who aren't familiar with where Wheeling is. And you're kind of in between, literally, Pennsylvania and Ohio. So he was pretty much just thanking his father that he became a Steelers fan and not a Browns fan, because you got to understand that people that are in Ohio are very territorial with their teams. And the criticism that I always receive, even though I can get to Heinz Field about 20 minutes faster based on my location and where I live, then I could get up the First Energy Stadium in Cleveland. And it's always been the case. I live closer to Pittsburgh than I do Cleveland. I always get the criticism from people that, you live in Ohio, how can you be a Steelers fan? It's almost like you're a traitor. And I do realize that there's quite a few, not just Steelers fans that are displaced, but Steelers fans that are kind of within that hour and a half radius of Pittsburgh, and we're just fans of so many different sports. In fact, I met a young gentleman and either his girlfriend or wife, and if they happen to actually be fans of this, guys, reach out to me, catch me on Facebook or Twitter if you by chance happen to hear this. But I was over at the Fan Blitz, and we were waiting for the 5th or 6th round draft choices. I think it was the 6th and 7th round draft choices over at Heinz Field, and they do this whole thing with the Fan Blitz. If you're not familiar with it, they actually open up the stadium, allow everyone in, and I was live streaming some of the picks. You had the fans that were announcing the picks. They were kind of emceed by Tunch Ilkin, and I want to say Chris Hokie was also helping to MC that. and making sure the fans said the guy's name right and stuff like that. But it was really cool. We're sitting at the podium and we start talking, and I tell him how I have a website, and I'm actually from Youngstown, Ohio. I always say Northeast Ohio. It's not an embarrassment thing. I kind of live just in the suburbs, so actually born, raised, and kind of living just on the cusp of Youngstown there. And I'm situated, for those of you who aren't familiar with the area, is practically smack dab in the middle. If you were to draw a diagonal line and put Cleveland at the top and Pittsburgh at the bottom, Youngstown is somewhere right in the middle there. So what you find is, and I found this in many different cities across the United States, at least in this geographic region of the Midwest, you'll find in Erie, Pennsylvania, too, the very same dynamic as you would in Youngstown, and perhaps even in Wheeling, as Jeff describes in his article, is that you're in between things. And you're in between teams. So up in Erie, instead of Youngstown, we're in between like Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers, and some people really choose a hard line between both. And you find people in Youngstown and some of these areas, the same thing with like Jeff. And I also had a commenter, I'm going to acknowledge right now, that commented on the last podcast episode, Paul R.K., who wanted to correct me about Cleveland having a hockey team, and I'll get to that in a second. But I did mean an NHL hockey franchise as opposed to some of the minor league teams, which Cleveland does have one of those teams. But, Paul pretty much hit the nail on the head, and then I'm reading Jeff's article, and I said, you know what, this would be something really cool to talk about, is how fans in these areas are in between things. So in Youngstown, you got a lot of people that are Indians and Pirates fans, and actually fans of both, which is actually quite possible. I happen to fall right into that category. And, up in Erie, Pennsylvania, Browns, Steelers, and even Buffalo Bills. And I guess down in Wheeling, which even I wasn't as cognizant of until reading and talking with Jeff, he could have ended up a Browns fan too. And that's kind of where I'm at, is thank God I'm a Steelers fan. And I don't mean that just to rib or twist the knife in any of my cousins' backs, or my uncle, or even my wife, who I've acknowledged many times is a Browns fan. And it's very fun to go to these Browns-Steelers games. We usually do the home and home. So we go to both games together, and, my wife really doesn't want to sit in the cold or the rain or the snow. She's not as diehard as myself, Brad, Michael, or any of the other cousins and family and friends that end up going to the games with me. But a lot of fun, and I just seen the misery that comes with the Cleveland thing. And it's really cool, though, because with Cleveland not having won a championship in so long, I'm not saying that the Penguins win wasn't sweet, but I think we've come to kind of expect it. We're kind of spoiled with the Penguins having last won one in 2009. The Steelers were last in a Super Bowl in 2010 or the 2010 season. Geez, that thing always, that always screws with me, like the 10 to 11 thing. So I'm sorry, I don't know the Roman numerals. Please don't shoot me. It was the one with the Packers, and we ended up losing, but they had won previous to that, 2005, 2008. So, yeah, I think the actual Super Bowl was played in 2011, but it was the 2010 season. So, geez, I really hate that. I hate when I get things wrong for you guys, and I hate getting called out on it, too, because you know what? Sometimes I just have so much, stuff in this brain of mine that you try and retain and regurgitate out, and I don't have an agenda today. I don't have any show notes. So just talking about the geographic areas and happening to fall into being a Steelers fan since I was such a young kid, I'm so gracious to have such great teams to follow, and I'm hoping the Steelers are going to make a real run at the Super Bowl this year. I mean, they had such a fantastic team last year, just riddled with injuries, but it's cool when the family comes together, because if you're like me or you're like Jeff and, you're in an area that's in between, and like I said earlier, Cleveland Indians and Pittsburgh Pirates, okay, we didn't have interleague baseball for the longest time. And even when that come around, and that is a thing now for 10, 15 years or something, but, they only play each other, the Pirates and the Indians, like maybe for 3 games every 3-4 years. So they don't see each other very regularly. That may even be longer than that. I'm not the big baseball guy. I could get a hold of my buddy over at North Shore 9 and ask him how often these interleague games are. But last year, like, for example, my uncle is a Cleveland Browns fan, and we're able to go, and I actually had World Series suites that 4th of July weekend. I got to sit in a nice box lounge, fully catered. It was a phenomenal time. PNC Park's always beautiful. We even traveled to go see the Pirates play down in Cincinnati, believe it or not, just to kind of take in some different ballparks. It's one of my things that I like to do. And my uncle got me into football, and particularly college football. I was telling a story how we follow my alma mater around, which is like a 1AA school, and you get to go to all these different colleges and stuff like that. And a lot of times, you're not going to beat like some of these bigger schools like an Ohio State, or, they really put it in. Youngstown State played Pitt last year, and I got to go to Heinz Field and finally take in what it's like to see a Pitt game at Heinz Field. But we go to this Indians and Bucks game, and it's on 4th of July weekend, well attended, very nice weather, and a lot of people I know were giving my uncle like these crooked, crazy looks because there he is going to this game wearing a Cleveland Indians t-shirt with a Pittsburgh Pirates ball cap. And as funny and crazy as that sounds, and the reason I was telling you about this couple that I was sitting with at the draft, I'm telling them like a story like that, and they're like, well, what hockey team do you like? What basketball team do you like? Wow, it's really interesting. What college team, And it's just, I'm not this wolf in sheep's clothing that's going to steer you the wrong way. Oh, he's not really a Pittsburgh type guy. Oh, I love Pittsburgh sports, but let's face it, unless they play each other in the World Series, I think there's a decorum with baseball that people just don't get into drunken fights too often with each other. Maybe in the postseason they do, but it seems like it's a pretty relaxed, cordial sport as opposed to football. I mean, people get in fights over their team all the time, right? Ready to go to war. Maybe it's just because it's a more violent game. Aside from getting hit with a pitch and benches clearing, you don't see a whole lot of action like that. And I don't know, maybe there are hockey fights, out in the parking lot or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what really flips people's triggers other than alcohol and maybe some passion for their team or sour feelings over losing, getting heckled by other fans. And, man, it's fun to heckle the Browns fans. But, geez, I tell you what, you run out of jokes when you're able to do it for like 15 years consecutively. And I really try and bite my tongue because I love football. I watch all NFL games, and pretty much, I think where most of us stand as far as Cleveland Browns are concerned, as far as Pittsburgh Steelers fans, we know we moved on. We had the Baltimore Ravens as a rival, and now the Cincinnati Bengals are definitely in our sights and looking to take that mantle away from the Ravens, and the Browns are just like a long afterthought. It's like, you lose to them like once every 3 or 4 years, and it's really painful when you're there in the stadium. I've been there a few times when you lose, and I've also been there for the good times, like last year, right before the playoffs. And I remember several years ago, it might have been about 5 years ago, when Troy Polamalu pretty much opens up the game with a pick six, and they were up 14-0, I think, before the guy who was the best man in my wedding, one of my best friends, Eric, also a Browns fan, comes and sits down in the seats, and it's already 14-0. He left at halftime, and I think he had the flu at that time too, so I'll actually excuse him for leaving. But that's when Eric Mangini was the coach with the Cleveland Browns, and even the Browns fans, they just take it in stride. I mean, the Cleveland people really, 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 they love their teams, just like Pittsburgh. And there's a lot of similarities. And that's what this Paul R.K. said. He was talking and commenting on the opening to my last episode. And he was saying, Cleveland does have a hockey team, because I had made the comment about, at least, being from Youngstown, the family and the friends are all we're all on one side. Most of us are Indians or Pirates fans or both, because like I said, they play in two different leagues. They don't really play each other. The odds are against either one of them making a World Series, because both of them are very rarely good at the same time. They tend to go in spurts, and the Pirates are really lagging right now, and the Indians are good, so that still holds up my end. Never know. You could see them. It could happen. That would be actually really, really cool. I can imagine the people that just go back and forth on practically not even a bus trip. It's a car trip between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. That would be an awesome World Series. I don't know who I would root for there, and I don't really want to think about that right now. But for basketball, we could all get together, and we're all behind the Cavs. And in hockey, we're all together and all behind the Pens. And we both just won the Stanley Cup and the NBA Finals. In fact, the Cavs just... I think everyone was so disappointed in thinking that they're not going to pull it through. Just that, that miserable feeling that all things go wrong. LeBron hits the court, missed the dunk, falls in a heap, looks like he breaks his wrist, gets up, goes to shoot a free throw. All he needs is a free throw, misses it. It's just like, oh my God, is this happening again? And I grew up all those years with So I'm not the bandwagoner type. I grew up with, Lemieux and Yager, and it was a lot harder to watch hockey as a kid growing up back then, especially in Northeast Ohio. It wasn't something that was regularly televised, but you got to follow through newspapers, magazines, occasionally the radio. That's the same way I had to follow the Cavaliers. And the Cavaliers, of course, losing to those great Bulls teams that had Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. And it was painful for all those years, and you just think it's going to happen again. Whereas when you're a Pittsburgh fan, you kind of tend to think, and you're kind of used to winning, and you kind of tend to think, you know what, Gino or Sid's going to pull this through for us, or Big Ben and AB, they're going to get this done, or even Kutch or somebody, you got all these great icons in sports, and you have something like the Cleveland Browns that's like, it seems like every year they're changing things, like they're changing their team, like I changed my socks. So Johnny Football comes, and he's supposed to be the big savior for this team, and now he's already run out of town. So this is a good thing, at least for Cleveland. And for those of you who are the Displaced fans and you're in between, and Paul tells me, okay, Cleveland does have a hockey team. They're the AHL Calder Cup champions this year, and they actually average about 8,500 fans, as he says here. And he's originally from the Burgh, and I love the Steelers and the Penguins, like the Tribe and the Bucks. So I'm not alone, but can never root for the Browns. And that's exactly where I'm at. I cannot root for the Cleveland Browns, obviously, except there is one exception there. And as I was saying, a lot of us, I think, give Cleveland a pass, and it's no longer the rivalry it used to be, although I do think the AFC North is the most hotly contested, just geographically has the best rivals, and the fans are so close to each other, and they could each attend each other's games, and there's that type of animosity. I mean, I remember when it used to be the AFC Central, and you had like the Houston Oilers, or who else was in the Central? Oh, geez, Jacksonville, when they were expansion and bringing Cleveland back in there. And now with just these four teams, it's just so great, just the rivalries that are there. But just something seems missing from that whole Cleveland thing. And of course, it's Cleveland winning, not only against Pittsburgh and this, beating them here or there, but just winning in general. So we kind of just give it a pass when, it's just one of those things that's sad. It's not the way that it used to be. But many of us, I do believe, fall into this category, as I was saying, with the rivals. And this may even be true now with another team, but the one team I can root for the Cleveland Browns and side with my wife and my family with is when they play the Baltimore Ravens, because I hate the Ravens. I don't hate the city of Baltimore. I actually think the city of Baltimore is a very beautiful city. I've been there very many times. But Baltimore Ravens themselves, they took the Cleveland Browns rivalry away from us. And most of the Steelers fans that I talk to feel very much so the same way and feel a kinship. When the Browns are playing the Ravens those 2 times a year, we want the Cleveland Browns to beat the Baltimore Ravens' ass. And now with the Cincinnati Bengals, I'm seeing a lot of Ohio people over here, speaking of which. You want to talk about being like just on a bandwagon and jumping on something just because it's within the borders of your state. I think it takes 5 hours to get to Cincinnati from here. You won't believe how many Cincinnati jackets and hats and shirts and jerseys and paraphernalia and crap that I see all over town anymore, because people are jumping on, oh, it's an Ohio team and it's Ohio pride. And I'm just like, that's kind of the thing I was getting at with Jeff's article here, and just talking about, well, he's very lucky because I ended up a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I'm very fortunate too, and I'm very fortunate to follow all of these great sports teams. I would really like to hear some other stories about this. I'm sure I'm not the only one out there, and in fact, I'm sure there are people who have moved away from Pittsburgh area or Western Pennsylvania, Northeast Ohio, that little panhandle of West Virginia. That's so cool too. I'm sure a lot of you follow a lot of college football and watch as many games as you can. Just how many colleges do we have around here? It's just really neat. I mean, I know there are Steelers fans that are West Virginia fans. They're Pitt fans. They're Ohio State fans. They're Penn State fans. Locally, Youngstown State here, but we support Ohio State too, because like in the same type of deal, they're kind of on 2 different levels, even though one's division, formerly 1A, 1AA, FBS, FCS, whatever you want to call this. I don't even know. Can it still be FBS now that they have a college football playoff? I don't know, but it's really neat to be able to have all of this like around you, and it's just this really cool culture. And even with the other hockey team down in in Wheeling, You got the Nailers, who almost won, the Kelly Cup. Almost escaped my memory right there. The Kelly Cup was like their version, the Calder Cup, the Stanley Cup. So you almost had like the Wheeling come away on a minor league level too, and you could still follow all of these teams and be a fan of all of this stuff without necessarily turning your back on being a diehard or just the immortal type Steelers fan. It is possible to reach out and be fans of all these teams. Really, where I draw the line, though, is, and I hope he doesn't hear it, I'll probably get fired, but it is my boss at work. And he happens to be a Browns fan and a Miami Dolphins fan. And let me tell you, that's double the misery, because neither one of those teams, they've been both dumpster fires for so long, and I just don't understand how you could be a fan of two NFL teams when the NFL teams they do tend to play each other, and it's much more likely that they'll play each other within a few years. Same thing with like the NBA, but like I was saying, no NBA team in Pittsburgh, no NHL franchise in Cleveland. So it kind of goes back and forth, and being right in the middle, that is just the sweet spot where there's two championships. And now I hope to tick off all of my Browns friends and family with the Steelers. Hopefully they get another Lombardi. Like I said, no agenda today, folks, but I would love to hear your stories. Would love to hear, if you're out in Arizona or Texas or something, and Texas is a good one. If you're in Cowboys country, and I was there for Thanksgiving this past year, and I mean, they try and just stamp that Dallas Cowboys star on practically everything, and the Lone Star, of course, on the flag, and that's like a symbol. It's a treasured thing for Texas, but the Dallas Cowboys try and own that and become America's team. I want to hear stories. I want to hear, if you're part of a house divided, and, you see the NFL commercials, they've captured it pretty good, where you have like the in-laws sending someone like a Bears jersey for the little one, and maybe the mom or dad is a Packers fan. Kind of the same thing here with Browns and Steelers. I'd love to hear your stories. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm always grateful that you're hearing me too, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the Steel City Underground podcast. I'd like to remind you could always follow Steel City Underground on our various social media outlets. We're at this point already over 35,000 Vine loops in our first month with a Vine account. So if you happen to be into watching short 6-7 second video clips, head on over to Vine. You can find them all the time over on Twitter or by clicking on our links on any article and at the bottom of our page on steelcityunderground.com. But until then, be safe, be good, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.